I'm Paul Carter, founder and creative director of Get Carter Productions, and we are absolutely delighted to host the only 2019 Radio Audio Week event outside of London. Thank you, very good. And we think it's a really important one. I've been in radio advertising for most of my working life, and over the past 30 years, I've witnessed some massive changes to the industry, and a few things that have stayed, to be honest, exactly the same. Since the very beginning, when I used to accompany radio station sales execs on client meetings, the inevitable question after every presentation was, well, how do I know it's going to work? And the standard response included a wry smile and one of us saying, well, there are no guarantees. And if we knew that, we'd be sitting on my yacht, not in your porter cabin. But the truth was we didn't really know. And to an extent, we still don't. But I hope that this evening's presentation shows that we're an awful lot closer. I've been very fortunate to surround myself with great people and some brilliant clients over the years. And the fact that we've had so much success is the reason we're still thriving and still building the experience to kind of inherently know when something's right or very wrong with a radio commercial. We've done it the hard way. We've learned about success through trial and, yes, occasional error, but that's changing. And to show you what success looks like and how it can be measured using science, please welcome one of the UK's leading research companies based here in the Northeast. Ladies and gentlemen, please give it up for DRG Global's Dr. Judith Welford. Thank you.
Thanks. I feel like we should have dropped the doctor now. It's a bit OTT, isn't it? I'm really pleased to be here today, actually. We do a lot in radio, which I'll tell you about. But what we were invited here tonight to do is talk to you about how we work with various clients, advertising agencies, brands to prove that their advertising works, and specifically their radio advertising tonight. My background is, so I am research director of DRG. Some people in the room might know us as Dipsticks Research. We rebranded a couple of years ago to bring all our brands together under one identity. I've worked in commercial radio across public sector and private sector working with public and private sector clients for the best part of a decade now. Before that, my background was academic, studying a PhD and teaching a little bit as well in history. So I'm not unfamiliar with places like this. I spent a lot of time in the past in buildings like this. So that's a bit about me. The company, so this is always a fun photograph. This is DRG in the early days. Was set up in mid-90s. You can tell it's the 90s, can't you? The hair and the outfits and everything. So the company was originally set up by John and Fiona Raglan, who you can see in the front there. A lot of people in the industry know them quite well. They're still involved in the business nowadays. To provide quality research to, primarily, to begin with, media and advertising agencies. John, who founded DRG, had and still has a really strong connect with radio. His background was at Metro Radio. So a lot of the early work that we did were for people like those in the radio sector. We did a lot of pit tests in the early days to help get licenses in place and things like that. Nowadays, we work very broadly across public sector, with brands, with media agencies, with media owners. But that's not what I'm here to talk to you about tonight. I'm not to talk to you about DRG and all our experience. What I'm here to focus on is what we've done in radio, and specifically tonight to talk to you about RadioGauge, which is a measurement we've been running for over 10 years now, measuring the impact and the effectiveness of radio advertising. So just to set the scene, because I am a historian at heart, I'm going to take you back in time. So imagine the wibbly-wobbly going back in time to the mid-noughties. Not sure, what was anyone doing in the mid-noughties? Doing the mid-noughties? No idea. Okay, bad question. I was sitting in a building like this, finishing my PhD, being quite boring, but there was loads of other stuff going on as well. So Ellen MacArthur was sailing around the world. Tony Blair was handing over to Gordon Brown. We had lots of interesting things going on in film Casino Royale came out. Doctor Who was back on the TV again. Richard Dawkins releasing his The God Delusion. And in music, we had Rihanna, who we were all blaming for the worst summer we'd ever seen, because it was raining, obviously. Unfortunately, we had James Blunt crooning at us about how beautiful we all were. And it got worse, because we had Tony Christie and Peter Kay talking about the road to Amarillo, which wasn't great. But unfortunately and unbelievably, this wasn't the worst thing happening in radio at the time. If we look at advertising spend in radio, what we could see in the mid-noughties was that spend was declining, what looked like a terminal decline. So what this basically shows us is percentage of advertisers spending £100,000 plus per annum leaving radio. This is spend just walking out of the door. There were a few theories on why this decline was taking place. Historically, brands would come and use radio once and then depart and not use it again. There was potential for inexperienced radio advertisers who failed to understand what was necessarily going on with their campaign. So if their campaign didn't work particularly well, instead of looking at their creative, they'd blame the channel itself, and that stopped spend coming back. And of course, at the same time as this was all going on within radio itself, what we could actually see is if we look at digital spend, more ad budgets were being gobbled up by digital more and more year on year on year. So this looked like a pretty bad picture for radio. The RAB, being the body responsible for radio advertising, decided that really this decline couldn't continue, they had to do something. So they decided to approach it headfirst with an initiative called RadioGauge, which is a research initiative, and we were their partner of choice to deliver this. So RadioGauge, essentially what it was set up to do and does is threefold. So to measure the performance of radio advertising for brands in any market sector, to create a benchmark so that as campaigns are tested on an ongoing basis, they can be measured against that benchmark to see where they sit against the average. It wasn't just about measuring that campaign itself, though. It was about understanding the impact of the creative in radio advertising as well, because this was felt to be a big gap, understanding the creative, how it worked, what its impact was. And finally, to actually educate and encourage advertisers to improve their performance, so a continuous improvement. So they'd get their results from their campaign, they'd get their creative results, and they'd look at what worked and what didn't work, and then improve things moving forward. The methodology and the approach is a fairly straightforward and simple one. In terms of research, what we describe as it's a classic, it's a test control methodology. So what that means is that we have a test sample, who are people who are exposed to the advertising, in this case, commercial radio listeners. And we have a control sample who are people who have no exposure to the advertising at all. And then simply what we do is we measure their awareness levels on a campaign basis across brand awareness, brand perceptions, advertising awareness, brand considerations, and a creative suite of questions, which is within the survey we deliver, which is called the 5 Eyes Creative Score. What RadioGauge tells us what it tells us repeatedly and consistently and has over time, is that radio makes a measurable impact and uplift in terms of ad and brand awareness. So these aren't genuine figures, they're just hold figures, but this is what the results of RadioGauge tend to look like when we're measuring a campaign. So what we tend to see is that, or pretty much always see, is that non-listers have a certain level of awareness, and commercial radio listeners who have been exposed to an advert always have an uplift of a certain amount, and we can measure that within the methodology and actually test for the impact of radio advertising. That's overall, so it will tell us how well an advert is doing specifically against a benchmark that we can look at, but we can also look at performance within a sector as well. So we can look at what the measurable uplift is between an average sample, a sector, so in this case, say a restaurant, any number of restaurant brands that we might have tested in RadioGauge, and then the specific brand, which would be within the restaurant sector. So we can look at what those differences are And to this point, we've measured, I think it's over 700 campaigns through RadioGauge. So there's a lot of benchmarking data in that database to measure against, and a lot of sector data as well. The other element outside of the measurement is obviously creative analysis, which I've mentioned, which is in the form of the 5 I's. So the 5 I's are shown here. Involvement, meaning, so the actor's voice makes the advert interesting and amusing. Identity, recognise the ad as being something that's a long-running campaign. Impression, so enjoyed listening to it because you could identify with it. Information, so is it giving me clearly stating some information about an incentive or where I can buy a product. And integration, so is it familiar? Does it have a hook with a TV advert, for example? And these are the ways in which we measure the creative elements of a campaign. The other element of RadioGauge, which we run quite regularly, is a bespoke tool that we input into the survey, which is called the engagement meter. So probably the best way to see the engagement meter is to see the engagement meter. But what I wanted to show you, because this is a session about radio advertising, is to play some of the best measuring or best performing radio ads that we've tested through RadioGauge. So.
Say mama.
Daddy.
Alexa, play the Ting Tings.
That's not my name. That's not my name.
40 million songs. One for every moment. Amazon Music Unlimited. Start your 30-day free trial today. Automatically renews monthly or annually. Cancel anytime.
You take the Cadbury Pots of Joy chilled dessert from the fridge. You anticipate the taste of the real melted Cadbury milk chocolate, the creamy yumminess begging you to peel back the lid. Then you remember you're still in the supermarket. Cadbury Pots of Joy chilled desserts, Cadbury Dairy Milk, Cadbury Caramel, and right now special spooky Cadbury Scream Egg for Halloween. Free the joy!
We'll keep on turning. Proud to keep on burning. Rolling on the river.
With breakdown cover from the AA, we'll do whatever it takes to make sure your big wheels keep on turning. Our mechanics usually get you going again in 30 minutes. Breakdown cover from the AA, because anything can happen.
So what the engagement meter analyzer does, and this is part of the survey, so we play all of our respondents, whichever ads we're testing, and we ask them to tell us how much they're enjoying the ad as it's playing through it. What the engagement meter analyzer does is visualize this for us over the ad, so it shows us which part of the ad respondents, listeners are most enjoying and where there's drop-off in terms of the content. This is one of the best performing ads, so what we can see is in the green line is the average of all radio ads that we've tested through RadioGauge versus the actual ad itself. So as you can see in this case, the AA ad performed much above the average radio ad. Another key element of RadioGauge specifically for Radio Centre is actually the return on investment. So over 2008 to 2016, the average return on investment was £141 per pound spent on research. In the first year, which is the figure shown there, the average return on investment was £117 per pound spent on research. In terms of the toolkit that RadioGauge provides advertisers with, it's really about informing and understanding. So what the RadioGauge data provides us with as well is an understanding in terms of creative, what works in creative, what catches the hearing, I guess, of listeners. So we know that things like an established creative route, links, music links between a TV ad. For example, in the AA ad that we've just listened to, there's a direct link between the TV ad and the radio ad. Those things work really, really strongly and to increase the performance of radio advertising. Unfortunately, what you can see in the numbers next to the bars there is that those are the percentage of campaigns that typically have those elements included in them. So RadioGauge was really about, on Radio Centre, we're really aiming at trying to educate people to say, actually, if we include these things in, yes, radio works really well, but we can make it perform even better still. And RadioGauge data is used in loads of different ways. So this is from the Radio Centre website, which is Predict, which if anyone hasn't hit the Radio Centre website and looked at Predict, I'd recommend that you definitely do, because it's really versatile and is a really great use of RadioGauge data. And what that allows you to do is look at predicting uplift in different sectors, predicting uplift amongst different media, and also getting a sense of what the best performing radio ads are out there. There's a lot of versatile stuff and research on the Radio Centre website, so there's loads to learn there still. Of course, RadioGauge, I don't know how many people in the room have used RadioGauge before, whether you have or not. There are certain criteria for using RadioGauge. So RadioGauge the research is delivered for free to advertisers, but your campaign has to be national and you have to be spending a minimum of 300,000 on that campaign. So not all campaigns do qualify. In those instances where RadioGauge isn't an option, or where your campaign has already been tested on RadioGauge and they may say, no, you can't come back with another campaign, we offer out bespoke research, and that can be bespoke to channel, so it can be to radio or TV, digital press, whatever it might be. It can be campaign research, so we don't just test for radio, we can test a campaign overall, looking at different channels and what the impact, the multimedia impact of having a combination of different channels is. If your campaign is regional or it's targeted, we can test that as well through bespoke research. What we can also offer and do quite regularly is creative pre-testing. So RadioGauge is great in the sense that it provides you with a lot of information about how your creative has performed, but what it doesn't necessarily do is give you that information before you've pushed out that creative on the radio. So one of the things that the guys in my team do is work closely where the timescales work with clients to creative pre-test before a campaign has even hit the radio. That's it.
Thank you very much, Judith. Really, honestly, the more that you look into this stuff, the more fascinating it becomes. And it's nice to know, from my point of view, there's actually now some science to back up some of the stuff that we've been preaching for all these years around the importance of getting the creative right. Before we let you go, on this lovely summer's evening, spring evening, there's just one thought that I'd like to leave you with. And I suppose it's on behalf of us creatives everywhere. We absolutely get the 5 eyes. We love the engagement meter. We understand these things. Like the majority of research, they're indicators, and they're not a formula for success in the sense that you can't reverse engineer this stuff. If you studied hit records from the last 50 years, you can get a very good feel for technically how they work and what components they share. And it doesn't necessarily mean you can simply apply the most common chord structures, instrumentation, and vocal styles and generate a guaranteed hit. Unless, of course, you're an Oasis, which they've done that quite well over the years. But the truth is, the really good ear-catching commercials are a bit like viral content, that unicorn that we love to see. They just kind of appear, and they're just generated by people who really see things differently. There's always a perfectly safe option when you're making a commercial, and you can hear them on the radio stations up and down the land every hour of every day. But if you're engaging professional, responsible creatives who want to make a success of your campaign, Give them the freedom, please, to have great ideas. It might not happen every time, but just, you know, when it does, it's magic. So, I'm going to leave you with an ad that hopefully illustrates what I'm talking about and backs up everything that Judith said. This is an ad that the client didn't understand, didn't like, and didn't want to make. When he had it outlined to him, he complained that it was 3 times longer than most ads. It didn't contain the product or any other details, for that matter. In fact, even when it was made, it was actually canned for 4 months, only to be broadcast fully once it had been leaked by somebody in the creative department. If the writer has any regrets, he says that everyone celebrated it creatively. What gets talked about less is how effective it actually was from a business point of view. Turn to page. The return on the investment for this commercial was 3 times the normal level for this massive global advertiser. So I'm talking about a TV commercial. But as this is Radio Audio Week, it's only right and proper that we let the power of the audio paint the pictures for us. So once again, thank you very, very much to Judith from DRG and the guys at DRG. And thank you for the Radio Centre for helping us make all this possible. And here's the ad that I hope you will remember. Thank you.